Hi, everybody. I'm Bill Brennan, welcoming you to another edition of Honolulu on the Move, the show that brings you the latest news and information about the Honolulu Rail Transit Project. The construction market here in Honolulu is a hot one in 2015 and is likely to add some increases to the projected budget for the remaining work on the rail project. HART is taking actions to address the financial challenges that may lie ahead, while continuing to make progress on the construction of the first half of the Guideway and the Rail Operations Center in Waipahu. HART Executive Director and CEO Dan Grabowskis and Honolulu Mayor Kirk Caldwell recently discussed both the progress and the challenges on the Hawaii Public Radio call-in talk show Town Square, hosted by HPR's Beth Ann Kozlovich.
Welcome to you both.
Hey, Beth Ann, thanks for having us back on. I always enjoy coming to Town Square and talking story with your listeners.
Nice to have you
Thank
here.
Great to be here.
And nice to have you back, too, Dan Grabowskis. It's been a little while.
Thank you.
So this time last month, the December Board of Directors meeting made the announcement that the overruns, and they were going to be pretty lengthy, and you also had an action plan to reduce those costs. For about a year, though, some of the revenue from the surcharge has been at a deficit, too. Mayor Caldwell, did you ever stop to think at some point maybe this project would be in trouble?
No, Beth Ann, in fact, you talk about the shortfall in GT collections. It's something that was brought to my attention when I became mayor by Dan, and we actually started to meet with the Department of Taxation to see if we couldn't get a better handle on why is GT growth, the slope of the growth for the state of Hawaii is a pretty steep slope. And for GT collection for rail, it was a lower slope. It should be paralleling each other because Oahu with 1 million people, with Oahu with the military, Oahu with most of the visitors coming here, Oahu with all this construction, we believe that we should have a stronger slope and be collecting more GET than we're collecting. So we've reached out with the previous administration. We got some information, but not a real good understanding. And since David Ige has become governor, I've gone over to sit down with him. We've talked together, and as you know, the governor is very passionate about making sure that all taxes that are owed get collected. And so he says he's willing to work with us to see why there is this shortfall now of about $40 million, between $41 and $40 million, and see if we can't reverse that curve. Because it's critical to make sure we have all the money we need and that everyone is paying the tax so we build this system that we committed to build.
Did you have any indication why those two taxes weren't tracking each other as they should have been?
Well, they explained that there's a lag, that because there's a lot of manual operations at Department of Taxation where they actually open envelopes, that it was a matter of opening and posting and that they'd catch up. But if that was the case, both slopes would be the same, right? They'd maybe be a gap, but would be paralleling each other. But actually the slope falls away from the state collections. And so there's another story there. We don't know if maybe some folks aren't paying it, or if some folks who have operations on all islands are paying, moving the payment over to a neighbor island to avoid paying the 0.5%. We're not certain. And all we're asking for is let's look at some tax returns. Maybe let's look at some type of audit to answer some of those questions. A good slice, take 1,000 returns filed on this island and see what it shows. And I think we'll get a better handle. That has not happened, and I'm hoping we'll get that opportunity.
Those would be random
I would propose random.
That would be audited.
Yeah, that's what I would propose.
And those would be average people and businesses.
That's correct.
For some people, that sounds scary.
Well, I think everyone should be paying the taxes they're supposed to be paying. We do in this room, and I believe others should too. We'll find out. Maybe they all are paying, but then there has to be another reason why we on Oahu would be getting less of our GT share than we should, because we know that with unemployment here, it's almost 3.5%. That's almost full employment. Our unemployment is much better than the neighbor islands. So I don't see why we shouldn't actually, our slope should be steeper than the state slope, because we are generating so much income on this island.
Dan Grabowskis, the surcharge is a smaller portion of this. It's got a story in itself, but looking at the cost overruns and looking at how much more the rail project is going to cost us now, and even looking back into some of the reports that were done 5 years ago, 7 years ago, and the changes in the numbers, one can clearly see that it's always costing us more. And here we are in 2015. Who knows what may happen in the next 4 years? How do you project in any sort of way to take care of what's happening in the last little while, and what's the shortfall there, and somehow safeguard against the future.
Well, people, I'm sure, can reasonably see that when you have a mega project that has many millions of dollars, lots of moving parts, and occupies many years between the conception, the design, and ultimately the construction, you have ups and downs in the economy, you have changes and circumstances that you have to deal with. So you do the best you can to try to project into the future. Over the life of this project, we've seen some very favorable bids come in. When the first bids in the first couple of the first 10 miles of the Guideway came in, for instance, those bids actually came in under our estimate back in 2009 and 2010. So those were very favorable. What we're doing now, unfortunately, is that as a result of delays, some because of lawsuits that halted our project, we've now been shifted into a different time for our bids. So we're bidding now in a very hot market where we've got a lot of competition for other vertical construction. We're competing in many ways against those high-rises in Kaka'ako for the businesses who are looking at construction companies to do work. So we're seeing these costs rise. We opened the bids for the first 9 stations last fall, and that was really a tipping point for us. We'd monitored things like the GET lagging slightly behind. We'd monitored another negative indicator, which is we had these delay claims, and we were negotiating them and paying those claims out. But it was really when we opened the bids for those first 9 stations that we realized we're now bidding the final 40% or so of the construction contracts in a very different market than was anticipated back several years ago because of the delays. So as a result of that, we've recalculated and recalibrated what we believe the future costs of the project will be, and it's from those numbers that we were able to put together a projection of between $550 and $700 million in a total, about 5 to 10. This would be about 10 to 15% off of what the total cost projections would have been, primarily driven by the GET lagging, by the higher bids, and by these delay claims we had to pay. Delay claims totaled about will have totaled about $190 million by the time all is said and done. So we've survived a lot. Legal battles have been fought and won, but they have cost us a lot of money, and they've cost us time, which is in some cases now costing us even more money.
You've talked about repackaging some of the bids. Usually consumers are told that if they bundle services, they're going to get a better deal. Why is repackaging and sort of disentangling some of these services from each other going to actually make a better deal for us?
It's a great question, and usually it is counterintuitive, right? You buy in bulk and you save. The interesting thing is there are some unique challenges we face in construction here in Hawaii. We are not able to just readily ship equipment from one state border to another or have people who can commute from one state into our state to work. We are an island. And so we have basically challenged by finite resources on the island, or if we need to bring resources onto the island, it's very expensive. So one of the things we found from talking to the construction companies was that the construction companies here are not all mega companies. And if we have a mega bid situation, it's going to be very difficult for them to participate. And what is more significant is that the subcontractors that they would hire, the local companies that we want to employ in this project, found that the 9 stations together was just too big for them to bid on. So we had very little competition among the subcontractors and subsuppliers. What we learned was to right-size these projects and these bid offers for Hawaii and maximize what we can leverage here. We've taken the 9 stations and broken them up into 3 packages of 3. And from the interviews we've had with construction companies, we believe that local companies and local sub-suppliers will now be able to participate with more competition, and that should help us to drive down some costs.
So how do you maintain, for both of you, how do you maintain some sense of constancy then if this package of 3 and that package of 3 and that package of 3, so that all of them have obviously the same specs but also the same level of quality?
You do that through the bid process. Another way to look at it is you're also not putting all of your eggs in one basket with one company that might not be the best company to work with. So what we're able to do is manage individually those contracts. You can go to the other extreme. We wouldn't break them into 9 separate or individual contracts. That's probably too cumbersome, too much management. But the 3 packages of 3 seems to be maybe we hope the sweet spot for the businesses here and the local companies that can compete on these projects.
Was there any thought to do that in the beginning, that might be a better rationale?
Again, it's people sat at a table and sort of competed to think about whether or not bigger meant better because of economies of scale, or smaller and right-sizing them might be better. It was discussed. The idea was that sort of bigger was better. We found out that that wasn't the case. So we halted that bid solicitation. We canceled it, and we're doing what we think the industry is telling us is going to give us the lowest price.
If you're just joining us tonight, we're talking about the progress and the challenges of Oahu's rail project. Mayor Kirk Caldwell is here, also CEO of HART, Dan Grabauskas. And you too, if you have a question and you'd like to join our conversation, the phone lines are open, 941-3689. If you're on Oahu, use that number, 941-3689. And from the neighbor islands, 877-941-3689. Mayor, you wanted to jump in here a moment ago.
I wanted to emphasize one thing. I think the breaking of these contracts into smaller bid amounts is a good thing for our local workforce. As Dan mentioned, when these mega contracts were put out, you had to have mega companies, some of the largest construction companies in the entire world, bidding. And yes, we got great quality work, but some of the opportunity was lost for our local companies. And I believe that by breaking in these, the 9 stations and the 3 packages of 3 stations each will give more opportunity, create greater competition, and hopefully reduce the bids. And I wanted to say the first bid package went out last year. It's going to be open in February, correct,
That's
Dan?
right. That's right.
And we're going to see whether, having done that, what's the competition like, and has the cost come down? Because when it was a 9-station bid, the low bid was 63% higher than our anticipated budget. Some folks said, why didn't we wait until this new bid came out before he talked about these cost increases? Because we'd have a better measurement. But both Dan and I believed to be fully transparent, and we agreed when I became mayor, became executive director, we're going to report all the good news and the bad news. So we did it in December to share with the public what our concern was and what we were going to be doing to try to address it, instead of kicking the can down the road and hoping the next bid selection would come in lower and then talk about it. And I think it's the right way to be, and this is going to be a dialogue we're going to continue for the remainder of this project, which goes to 2019.
Well, there's some callers who would like to be dialoguing with both of you. We're going to get you in on
the rest of the show was dedicated to the questions and comments of the listeners of the program, and they ran the gamut. Everything from security cameras to power from Hawaiian Electric was discussed. The very first question concerned HART's rail cars.
I'm very pleased to report that the rail car manufacturing is exactly where it needs to be. In fact, while we look at the columns and the guideway here on Oahu and the progress, the first rail car began manufacture at a factory in November in Italy. The company that we've hired to do the manufacturing is called Ansaldo Breda. They're an Italian company, so they'll be framing out the rail cars in Italy and then shipping them to Pittsburgh, California factory for final assembly. We hit 2 really significant milestones, Aaron, in the last 6 months. One was we completed the substantial design in the late summer of last year, and that was very important for us to hit. And then the next significant milestone was to actually begin the assembly of the rail cars in November, and we hit that milestone as well. We just recently had a team of our folks go to the 3 factories in Italy that are manufacturing components, including the one that's assembling them, and they report back they're on schedule, very high quality work, and things going very, very well. So that translates into the fact that that first rail car in a few months will go, or that frame will go to California. It'll reach final assembly at December of this year, and we can anticipate the first rail car arriving here in Honolulu in the first quarter of next year. So just about a year away from now, people will actually see one of our first trains arriving here.
The aesthetics of the rail project are a concern to some. One caller pleaded, "Don't let it be ugly."
Well, aesthetics are important. I mean, we obviously live in this beautiful place where aesthetics bring us tourists, and they also bring a lot of people a great deal of joy in living here. To have an ugly rail wouldn't exactly be good fun for anybody. I mean, obviously there's a certain measure of, if you want to call it ugliness, because it's going to be what it is in some of it, and depending upon your own aesthetic sense, that may or may not make you happy. But in terms of the artwork and some of the other things that you talked about early on in the project, those things are not going to be thrown out?
So I think the caller may be reacting to a question I received from City Council yesterday, and they were asking me, are you going to be able to cut and save money. And in fact, what's on the table, and anything that's non-essential should be cut. And what I said back to folks at the council was, we are looking at everything, but we're also going to be very transparent with the public, because while there may be a minimal functional element to what we need to deliver, one of the most important things that I've heard from my numerous community meetings, especially on our station designs, is we want this to not just be functional, but to be a part of the community. It's going to be a part of our neighborhood. So we do have an art program. We do have a program for decorative columns around the stations. And what I said to folks at the council who asked the question was, sure, everything's on the table, but I want the folks, the public and the community should have a dialogue on, if it's not an essential element, do you really want me to cut this? Or in the alternative, is there a way to come up with some additional way to fund that element? Because I don't want to build something that people can't be proud of. And so all I can tell you is that what we will do is be very transparent about what costs could be saved by certain elements if they're cut. And if folks say, I would rather pay something more or extend the GET and have the thing built right and look beautiful, then that's something that we should have as a conversation in the community.
I did want to add, Brett, I share your concern. We're building a system that's going to be around for 100 years. Generations are going to be driving under it, riding on it, and we want to make sure that those generations see something that tells the story of this place. Dan talked about how it has to be tied to the land where it runs through, and those decorative columns that have been put up so far do tell that story. While it's important that we manage our costs, there are other forms of value engineering, maybe not making some of the stations as large or as grand in other ways, but still make sure that the aesthetics, the pure, basic, simple aesthetics, are as good as possible so that we can look at it and feel good about it. And I think if you were to drive out to the Eva Plain where Ho'opili is going to be built, and you stood underneath these columns, and I have on the spans, it's pretty darn nice looking, I have to say. I was more pleased than what I thought. And I'm hoping that we continue that trend for the remainder of the project.
One area that Hart staffers have been particularly busy with is the acquisition of parcels of land and property needed for the rail project. One caller wondered how that is progressing.
Actually, I can report that as of today, we've acquired a little over 75% of the property that we need to build this project, and we're running about $12 million under our budget, and that's good. So we are actually right on schedule where we want to be in terms of property acquisition, and we are actually slightly under budget. We have a total budget of about $220 million for property acquisition, and my expectation is as we complete the final 20 to 25% of acquisitions that we should end with a surplus in that account.
Surpluses are good, even if it's a smaller one of that nature.
They are very good.
Thanks very much for the call, Shannon. But as you talk about having acquired what you need to be able to put the remainder of those stations in, we saw that account of the blood bank saying, we got to move. This is going to cost us. We're a nonprofit. Is there going to be any help? Is there going to be any help?
So we work very closely with every business and every property owner along the route. In some cases, the property owner is not the owner of the property. Is not the owner of the business. So we work with both. And we are required by federal law to treat all of these businesses as fairly as possible. We do multiple appraisals to give them the value if it's a full or partial take. And to the degree that there are businesses that are in any way disrupted or have to be relocated, a part of that $220 million I mentioned is not just to actually acquire easements or purchase a property in fee, but it's also to relocate businesses, give them search services to find new locations. So we work very closely with them in each and every instance. And I can tell you the same thing is true for the blood bank. We are working very closely with them. They're a vital resource. They're a link that is irreplaceable here on the island for people who need blood at our facilities. So we know that not all businesses are created equal, so we're working very closely with them. And our hope is that we'll be able to only have a partial take where we only take a small sliver along the roadway and not have to disrupt their business or have to take the full building.
When will you know that?
So far, the information that we've been able to have presented to us by them and that we presented to them seems to indicate that we do not need to take the whole building. They have some folks who think that we may need to, so we've invited them to give us that evidence and that information. And then the other thing we've said to them is we can work very closely with you during the period of construction as we go past your building to make sure that there's no disruptions for equipment, vehicles to get in and out with blood. The good news about the way we're constructing things, Beth Ann, is that those columns are only about every 125 feet apart. So the actual impact to any one business while we're doing the column construction lasts only about 2 to 4 weeks. So it's not a long time. We're pretty convinced we can work with them during that short duration to make sure that any comings and goings that they need at that facility can take place.
And will rail go to the UH Manoa? That's a question a lot of people have, and a lot of people want to see HART make that happen.
This particular project is 20 miles, 21 stations, and goes from East Kapolei near the Kroc Center to Ala Moana Shopping Center. And in the parlance of the federal government, it's the minimum operable segment that was determined by Oahu residents and the federal government. But the real story is that the study about what would be optimal for Oahu was something called the locally preferred alternative, right? So the locally preferred alternative was actually a little bit longer. It went from downtown Kapolei all the way to UH Manoa, about 26.5 miles or so. And that additional length was shrunk to the 20 miles, really just to fit the budget that was originally proposed. I know we're pretty excited about the fact that I think this is going to be a really tremendously successful project. People are going to love riding it. And what I hear from people is, okay, there's been some question about whether or not this is going to go forward or not. But if you're going to build this, you got to get to Manoa. And so that may be the next big conversation, I think, for the community is actually making the resources available to go to downtown Kapolei and to Manoa.
I do want to add to
when
it.
do you think that we're going to actually have that conversation?
Well, I think we had it. Last year, we actually put in legislation. This extending the excise tax or lifting the sunset was discussed last session because we're looking for funds to continue the project up to UH, as Dan mentioned, and all the way to Kalailoa, downtown Kapolei into Kalailoa, that locally preferred alternative. Because I believe that this system should at least go up to our main flagship campus in Manoa, and many people have said, why doesn't it? And we wanted to start raising the money now because if we're going to continue, HART is ramped up. It's a construction company right now. Once the project is finished in 2019, all of Dan's guys who are working on construction go to other places, and it becomes an operating system. We want to keep marching forward from Ala Moana Shopping Center up to UH and not lose that talent, that experience, that know-all attitude so we can finish it. And so we need to start raising the money now in order to get the steam that we need, to get the amount of money we need to keep going. The other thing I wanted to emphasize to Thomas, this is why I'm excited. I think it's probably the only system in the country that connects so many college campuses. UH West Oahu, Leeward Community College, Honolulu Community College, Pacific, University Pacific, not Pacific, HPU, Hawaii Pacific University, John A. Burns School of Medicine, there's a station just Mauka of the Burns, and then up to UH Manoa. So a kid could go to school at UH Manoa, could get on the train, get out to UH West Oahu in, 40 minutes maybe, and go to a class there and then come back to Leeward, and get off at Honolulu Community College to go home or take a class there. No other system, no college system, I think, is going to be linked like ours is, partly because we are a linear city. We live along this rail line, but it's a positive thing, and we need to do it for the future of our youth. And so I'm excited about going up to UH Manoa.
To say nothing of what it will do to decrease the car congestion.
Yes.
Due to our limited time, we're only able to bring you a snippet of the Town Square show. I'd like to thank Hawaii Public Radio and Beth Ann Kozlovich for allowing us into the studio so that we can bring you this rail report from Mayor Caldwell and HART's Dan Grabowskis. You can hear a podcast of the entire Town Square show by visiting HPR2's website and looking for Town Square Rail Progress Report. And we'll see if we can bring you some highlights on some future shows of Honolulu on the Move. That's going to do it for today. On behalf of all of us on the project team, mahalo for joining us. And we'll see you again next time for another edition of Honolulu on the Move.
If you have a question you'd like us to answer on our next Honolulu on the Move show, go ahead and hit us up on Twitter or Facebook. Just two of the places where you can stay informed with up-to-date information on the Honolulu Rail Transit Project. And you can view our latest project videos on our YouTube channel. If you'd like more information on the project, or would like a presentation to your group or organization, give us a call at our project hotline at 566-2299 or contact us via our website at honolulutransit.org. You'll be able to keep up with the latest news and information about the project, important meeting dates, times, and locations, and examine the official documents that are guiding the project's planning and construction. Take some time to visit honolulutransit.org.